John Sena just wanted a quiet evening alone, away from the spotlight. But one decision changed everything. What happened next will leave you speechless. Stay until the end to find out the shocking truth. Be sure to subscribe and leave a comment. Where are you watching from? The city was alive with its usual hum. Cars speeding by, streetlights flickering, and distant voices of late-night wanderers echoing through the urban maze. But for John Sena, none of it mattered. He had spent the entire day in a whirlwind of obligations, photo sessions, interviews, and relentless public interactions. Fame had its privileges, but it also came with an unbearable weight. That's why he found himself here, walking through the dimly lit park, craving a moment of solitude away from the adoring fans and flashing cameras. The park was almost empty at this late hour, the cool night air carrying a sense of eerie tranquility. Sena inhaled deeply, allowing his muscles to relax as he strolled along the paved path. His footsteps crunched against the gravel, the sound oddly soothing. He needed this. A break from everything. A chance to just be himself, away from the expectations the world had placed upon his shoulders. After a while, he veered off the main path onto a small grassy clearing, stretching his arms above his head before dropping down for a quick set of push-ups. The rhythm of his movement was steady, controlled, his mind slipping into a meditative state. Push-ups turned into sit-ups, sit-ups into burpees, each repetition shaking off the tension that had built up over the exhausting day. As he caught his breath and wiped the sweat from his brow, a movement in his peripheral vision made him pause. Near one of the park's ATM machines, partially concealed by the shadows of a tall oak tree, stood a lone figure. The man wore a long black coat with the hood pulled up, his posture stiff and uninviting. His presence immediately felt out of place. There was something unsettling about the way he loitered near the machine, his hands stuffed into his pockets, shifting slightly as if debating his next move. Sena's instincts tensed, honed from years of being alert in unpredictable situations. His gaze lingered on the figure for a few seconds longer, studying him, analyzing. Was he just waiting for someone? Or was he up to something? The man didn't make a move, didn't even glance in Sena's direction. The rational part of his brain told him it wasn't his problem. He was here to clear his mind, not to get involved in random late-night encounters. Shaking off the unease, Sena stood up and dusted off his pants. He rolled his shoulders back and resumed his walk, deciding to ignore the man by the ATM. It wasn't his business. It wasn't his fight. He had spent enough of his life stepping into conflicts. This time he would let it be. He strolled past the ATM, casting one last glance at the shadowed figure, but the man didn't react. He simply stood there, unmoving. Sena pushed the concern aside, choosing not to overthink it. Not tonight. He had come to this park to escape the world, not to get dragged into its darkness. As the distance grew between them, Sena's focus shifted back to his own thoughts. He had parked his car not too far from here, near one of the side exits of the park. He'd head back, get some rest, and maybe, just maybe, feel like himself again tomorrow. Little did he know, the choice he had just made, to walk past, to ignore, would soon come back to haunt him in ways he could never have anticipated. Sena walked toward his car, his thoughts still clouded by exhaustion. The park had given him a temporary escape, but reality was creeping back in. He reached the parking lot, the dim glow of the streetlights casting long shadows over the mostly empty space. Just as he was about to unlock his car, he heard hesitant footsteps approaching. He turned around instinctively, his muscles tensing out of habit, but relaxed slightly when he saw a woman walking toward him. She looked nervous, yet determined, as if battling an internal debate about whether or not she should speak to him. Her face lit up when their eyes met, confirming what he had already suspected. She had recognized him. "Excuse me," she said, her voice shaken with excitement. Are you John Sena?" Sena offered a small smile, already accustomed to these encounters. He had been trying to stay low-key, dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, but some fans had an uncanny ability to recognize him no matter what. He nodded. "Yeah, that's me." The woman let out a breath of relief, as if she had been holding it in. "Oh my God, I knew it. I've been a fan of yours since I was a kid," she gushed, her voice trembling slightly. "I can't believe I'm actually meeting you." Sena chuckled. "Well, I'm glad you did. What's your name?" "Monica," she said quickly, still visibly overwhelmed. I don't mean to bother you, but can I have your autograph?" She hesitated, then fumbled in her bag for something to write on. Sena took the offered notebook and pen, signing it with his usual signature before handing it back to her. She stared at it as if it were a priceless treasure. "Thank you so much," she whispered before glancing up at him again, something shifting in her expression. There was a flicker of hesitation, something deeper behind her initial excitement. She bit her lip, seemingly debating whether to say what was on her mind. Sena noticed a change in her demeanor and tilted his head slightly. "Something on your mind?" Monica exhaled and nodded. "Yeah, actually, I wanted to tell you something." She hesitated again before pressing on. "I have a little boy. His name is Tyler. He's only 7 years old, and he's your biggest fan." Sena smiled, already expecting the next part. He had met many parents who had shared similar stories about their kids admiring him. "That's awesome. Tell him I said hi." A shadow passed over Monica's face, and she swallowed hard. He's really sick," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "He has cancer, leukemia. We've been fighting it for over a year now. The treatments, they've been so hard on him. But through it all, he keeps watching your matches. He says you're his hero." Sena's expression softened. He had heard stories like this before, but they never got any easier. He knew what his presence meant to kids going through tough times, and it humbled him every single time. He stepped a little closer. "I'm really sorry to hear that," he said sincerely. "That's a tough fight for a little guy. How's he holding up?" Monica smiled sadly. "He's strong, stronger than I ever thought possible, but it's been rough. I work as much as I can to pay for his treatments, but it's never enough. Some days, I don't know how I'm going to make it through." She shook her head quickly. "I didn't mean to dump all this on you. I guess I just wanted to tell you how much you mean to him. To us." Sena felt a lump form in his throat. He had spent the whole evening thinking about how exhausted he was, how much he wanted to escape from everything. And yet, standing here now, hearing this, he realized just how much bigger the world's problems were than his own. Without a second thought, he reached up and removed his cap, then handed it to her. "Give this to Tyler for me," he said. "Tell him to keep fighting, and tell him I'm rooting for him." Monica's eyes widened in shock, her hands trembling as she took the cap. "Are you serious?" "Of course," Sena said, his smile genuine. "It's just a cap, but maybe it'll remind him that he's got a whole lot of people out there cheering him on." Monica's lips trembled as she clutched the cap to her chest. "He's going to lose his mind," she whispered. Thank you so much." Sena gave her a reassuring nod. "You both stay strong, all right?" Monica wiped at her eyes and nodded quickly. "We will." They shared a brief moment of understanding before she finally turned to leave, holding on to the cap like it was the most precious thing in the world. Sena watched her go, his chest feeling heavier than before. Tonight had started as just another night, just another attempt to escape the noise of fame. But now it had become something more. He had been reminded yet again of the impact he had on people's lives. He sighed, shaking off the weight of his thoughts as he opened his car door. Just as he was about to get inside, a sudden, piercing scream cut through the night air. Sena's body tensed instantly. The scream was coming from somewhere near the park. His mind flashed back to the man in the black coat. Dread twisted in his gut. Without a second thought, Sena slammed his car door shut and sprinted toward the sound. Sena sprinted toward the sound, his heart pounding with urgency. The scream had been sharp, raw, filled with terror. His mind raced as he cut across the dimly lit park, his powerful legs propelling him forward with unrelenting speed. He had no doubt. It was a woman's scream, and it was close. The moment he had heard it, his body had moved on instinct, the same instinct that had carried him through years in the ring and beyond. As he pushed forward, his pulse quickened at the worst possible thought. Monica. His conversation with her had ended only moments ago. What if she had walked straight into danger? What if the man in the black coat had been waiting for the right opportunity? The image of her, vulnerable and unsuspecting, flashed in his mind, and his jaw clenched. The sound of scuffling echoed through the trees ahead, followed by another muffled cry. Sena's stomach twisted. He pushed harder, weaving between the towering oaks and under the dim glow of flickering streetlights, his breath steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. His eyes scanned the darkness, searching, until he spotted movement near the same ATM he had passed earlier. His gut twisted. Under the artificial glow of the ATM's screen, he saw them. The man in the black coat had a woman pinned against the machine, his left hand gripping her arm, his right pressing a gleaming knife dangerously close to her side. The woman was shaking, her body stiff with fear. Sena couldn't see her face clearly, but he could hear her ragged, terrified breathing as she struggled in vain. "Give me the money," the man growled, his voice low, threatening. "I don't have anything, please." The woman's voice broke as she pleaded. "Don't lie to me," the man snarled, jerking her forward slightly. The knife glinted under the fluorescent glow. Sena didn't hesitate. His body surged forward before he even realized he had moved, his voice cutting through the night like a bullet. "Let her go." The man stiffened at the sound, his head snapping in Sena's direction. His face was partially obscured by the hood, but Sena could see the dark gleam of his eyes, sharp and calculating. The woman whimpered as the man's grip on her tightened. "Mind your business," the attacker snapped. His grip on the knife shifted, positioning it closer to the woman's ribs. Sena's muscles tensed, his hands curling into fists, his voice dropped to something low, dangerous. "I won't ask again. Let her go." The man scoffed. "Oh yeah? And what are you going to do about it?" Sena took a slow step forward. "You really want to find out?" For a moment, silence stretched between them. The only sounds were the woman's shallow breathing and the distant hum of traffic beyond the park. The attacker hesitated, his grip twitching, as if he was considering his options. Sena could see it, the indecision, the calculation. He had dealt with men like this before. He was waiting for an opening. And then, in the blink of an eye, the man lunged. The knife came fast, a flash of steel cutting through the dim light as the attacker aimed straight for Sena's torso. But Sena was faster. He twisted his body at the last second, just barely avoiding the blade. The sharp edge grazed his shirt, slicing through the fabric but missing flesh. Adrenaline roared through him. Sena moved on instinct, his reflexes honed from years of combat. He grabbed the attacker's wrist with iron-like force, twisting sharply. The man yelped, his grip on the knife faltering. Sena didn't waste a second. His other fist slammed into the attacker's jaw with the force of a hammer. The man stumbled back, dazed, the knife slipping from his fingers and clattering onto the pavement. Sena wasn't done. He surged forward, landing another devastating punch to the man's gut, driving the air from his lungs. The attacker let out a choked gasp before his legs buckled beneath him. He collapsed onto the cold concrete, completely motionless. Breathing heavily, Sena took a step back, his muscles still tense, ready for another attack that never came. The man wasn't getting up. The woman gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as she backed away from the unconscious attacker. Her breath came in ragged sobs, her entire body trembling. Sena turned to her, his expression softening. "Are you okay?" She nodded quickly, though her hands were still shaking. Yeah, thank you. I don't know what he would have done if you hadn't." Her voice broke, and she inhaled sharply. Sena glanced down at the attacker before pulling out his phone. "Let's call the cops. They'll take it from here." The woman nodded, hugging herself tightly as Sena dialed. He could still feel the sharp sting of adrenaline in his veins, but the danger had passed. The worst was over. Or so he thought. As the distant sound of sirens began to echo in the night, Sena couldn't shake the feeling that this night was far from over. Sena stood over the unconscious attacker, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. The sharp sting of adrenaline still coursed through his veins, but the fight was over. The man lay sprawled on the ground, motionless, his black coat splayed out beneath him like the wings of a fallen predator. The dim glow of the ATM flickered overhead, casting a cold light on the scene. Sena rolled his shoulders, feeling the torn fabric of his shirt flutter slightly against his skin where the knife had grazed him. It was a close call, but he had been through worse. The woman, still shaken, hugged herself tightly. Her breaths came in uneven gasps as she stared at her attacker with wide, terrified eyes. Sena took a cautious step toward her, softening his tone. "You're safe now." She nodded, though her hands still trembled. I can't believe this happened." Her voice wavered, as if she wasn't sure whether to cry or collapse. "He just came out of nowhere." Sena gave her a reassuring look before glancing at the attacker. "Did you see him before tonight?" She shook her head quickly. "No, I was just walking back from work. I stopped to take out some cash and he was suddenly behind me." She swallowed hard. "He kept saying he needed money, that he didn't want to hurt me. But then he pulled the knife, and I knew he wasn't going to let me go." Sena clenched his jaw. He had seen this kind of desperation before. It didn't justify anything, but it was a brutal reminder of the world they lived in. He pulled out his phone, checking the screen. The police were on their way. Sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Relief washed over the woman's face at the sound, but Sena stayed alert. Moments later, flashing red and blue lights painted the parking lot. A police cruiser pulled up fast, tires screeching slightly as it came to a stop. 2 officers stepped out, their hands hovering near their holsters as they assessed the scene. Sena raised his hand slightly in a non-threatening gesture. "He's down. No weapons." One officer approached cautiously, while the other moved to check the unconscious man. The woman quickly stepped forward, her voice still shaking. "He attacked me! He had a knife!" The officer near her nodded. "Are you injured?" "No, but he tried to rob me," she stammered. "If it weren't for him—" She glanced at Sena, her eyes full of gratitude. "I don't know what would have happened." The officer turned his attention fully to Sena. It was clear from the way his eyes widened slightly that he recognized him. Sena was used to it. The moment of hesitation, the flash of surprise, it was always the same when people saw him outside the ring. "You John Sena?" the officer asked, though it wasn't really a question. Sena nodded. "Yeah." The officer exhaled through his nose. "Well, damn." He shook his head slightly before focusing back on the situation. "What happened?" Sena kept his response brief and to the point. "I heard her scream. I ran over. He had a knife. I told him to let her go. He didn't. He came at me. I defended myself, and he went down." The second officer, who had just finished securing the unconscious man in cuffs, stood up. "He's breathing. Took a pretty bad hit to the jaw, though." Sena crossed his arms. "He'll live." The first officer glanced at the woman again. "We'll need your statement." She nodded quickly, still holding herself tightly. "Of course." The officer turned back to Sena. "We'll need yours, too." Sena sighed but nodded. "Yeah, no problem." As the officers handled the situation, Sena stepped back slightly, watching as they lifted the man off the ground. The attacker groaned weakly as they hauled him toward the back of the cruiser. The woman finally seemed to steady herself, though her hands still trembled. When everything settled, she turned to Sena once more. "I don't even know how to thank you." Sena shook his head. "You don't have to." "No, really," she insisted. You saved my life." Her voice broke slightly on the last word. "I don't know what would have happened if you weren't here." Sena met her gaze. "You don't have to think about that now." A tear slipped down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. "Can I at least know your name?" Sena almost chuckled at that. "You don't recognize me?" She blinked. Then realization dawned on her face and her mouth fell open slightly. "Oh my God, you're—" She stopped herself, shaking her head in disbelief. "I didn't even realize in the moment." Sena smiled faintly. "Happens more than you'd think." The officer returned with a small notepad. "All right, Mr. Sena, we've got what we need for now. If we need anything else, we'll reach out. And thanks for stepping in." Sena gave him a small nod. Just did what anyone should do. As the police car pulled away, taking the attacker with them, the woman exhaled deeply. "I still don't know how to thank you." Sena hesitated before reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a card and handed it to her. "This is my team's contact. If you ever need anything, just reach out." Her hands trembled as she took it. "I will. Thank you." Sena nodded one last time before turning toward his car. The night had taken a turn he hadn't expected, but at least now it was over, or so he thought, because what happened next would change everything. Sena sat in his car for a few moments, gripping the steering wheel as the weight of the night settled over him. The hum of the engine filled the quiet space, but his mind was still replaying the events that had just unfolded. The woman had been seconds away from something far worse. If he had ignored the scream, if he had hesitated even a second longer, she could have been seriously hurt, or worse. He let out a deep breath, forcing his shoulders to relax, but the adrenaline still lingered in his system, making his hands twitch slightly. As he finally pulled out of the parking lot, he found himself thinking about Monica and her son, Tyler, the little boy who was fighting a battle far tougher than anything Sena had ever faced. His mother had spoken with such quiet strength, but beneath it he had seen the exhaustion, the fear, the desperation of a parent doing everything she could. Sena knew that feeling well, not because he was a father, but because he had seen it in so many faces before. He glanced down at the torn edge of his shirt where the knife had barely missed him. A part of him knew he had been lucky tonight. Another part of him felt like luck had nothing to do with it. The next morning, Sena sat in his hotel room, scrolling through his phone, his thoughts still clouded. The world had already moved on. There were new headlines, new viral moments, and no one had a clue what had happened last night. And that was fine. He didn't do it for recognition. He never did. But one thought stuck with him. He could walk away from what happened in the park. He could let it fade into another long night, just another story that no one would ever know. But Monica and Tyler, they couldn't just walk away from their battle. And that didn't sit right with him. Without overthinking it, he grabbed his phone and made a call. "Hey," he said when his manager picked up, "I need you to find something for me." By the time afternoon rolled around, Sena had what he needed. Monica's contact information had been found, along with a few more details about her situation. It wasn't easy tracking her down, but he had resources, and he wasn't about to let this go. He made another call, setting things into motion before grabbing his keys and heading out. When he knocked on the door of the small apartment, he wasn't sure what to expect. The building was old but clean. The hallway smelled faintly of fresh laundry, and the walls were covered in fading beige paint. A few moments later, Monica answered, her face filled with shock the second she saw him standing there. "John?" she breathed, her eyes widening. What are you doing here?" Sena smiled, but his expression was serious. "I told you to reach out if you needed anything," he said simply. "You didn't. So I came to you." Tears instantly welled up in her eyes. She glanced back inside, as if making sure she wasn't dreaming, then stepped aside. "Please, come in." The apartment was small but tidy, decorated with family photos and children's drawings pinned to the fridge. Sena's eyes landed on one in particular, a picture of a muscular stick figure with a championship belt drawn in bright crayon. His name was scribbled in shaky handwriting above it. "That Tyler's?" he asked, pointing at the drawing. Monica nodded, pressing a hand to her mouth as she tried to compose herself. He's in his room resting. Today was a rough day." Sena's jaw tightened slightly. "How bad?" Monica swallowed hard. "Some days are better than others," she admitted. "But lately, it's been harder. The treatments, the side effects." Her voice hitched. "I just keep telling him to hold on." Sena nodded slowly, then reached into his pocket, pulling out an envelope. "I want to help." Monica's brows furrowed as she hesitantly took it. The second she opened it, her eyes widened. "What is this?" "It's everything Tyler needs," Sena said. "The best doctors, the best care. You don't have to fight this alone anymore." Tears streamed down her face. She shook her head, overwhelmed. I can't accept this. You don't have to do this." "I know I don't," Sena said gently, "but I want to." Monica covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to," Sena said. "Just tell Tyler that his hero is rooting for him." A small voice suddenly spoke from the doorway. "Mom?" Monica turned sharply, wiping at her eyes as Tyler peeked out from his room. He was small, far too small for a 7-year-old, his skin pale and his eyes tired. But the moment he spotted Sena standing in their living room, his expression transformed. His mouth fell open. His eyes went wide. John Sena was standing in his house. "No way," Tyler breathed. Sena grinned. "What's up, champ?" Tyler let out a gasp, his hands flying to his head as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He looked at his mom, then back at Sena, his body trembling with excitement despite his exhaustion. You're really here?" Sena crouched down to his level. "I'm really here," he said, "and I heard you're a fighter." Tyler nodded rapidly. "I'm strong," he said proudly. "I bet you are," Sena said, "but even the strongest fighters need a little backup sometimes." He tapped the envelope in Monica's hands. "So, I'm here to help." Tyler's eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them away quickly, trying to stay strong. Then, in a small voice, he whispered, "Thank you." Sena smiled and held out a fist. "You're welcome, buddy. Now let's get you better." Tyler beamed and bumped his tiny fist against Sena's much larger one. For the first time in a long time, hope filled the room, and Sena knew without a doubt that he had made the right choice. This story proves that true heroes exist not only in the ring, but in real life too. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from?